So here we're doing some robot testing. We're looking at a collaborative robot. One of the things that integrators and those considering installing cobots need to be considering is what are the forces and the potential hazards involved if one of these things was going to strike someone. So often what is the case is integrators or OEMs will make the assumption that the loads put into the cobot are going to be the actual loads that are experienced potentially by an operator if the robot was to strike them. Now the question is that correct? How do you validate that? How do you test that? So what we've got here is we've got a collaborative robot load cell to validate those numbers that are being put into the settings within the cobot itself. So the other thing to note here is the standard applicable for robots and cobots is 10218. Now, one of the requirements in there is a risk assessment being completed, obviously identifying the hazards and then identifying appropriate control measures. The question then is how do you validate that you have completed or implemented suitably those control measures? So within your risk assessment, you'll have identified using 15066 to look at load and force limits. You'll have identified, am I going to put my hand in here? Okay. If I am going to put my hand in here, what is the appropriate load that the cobot can then apply to my hand and it be deemed safe? So in this example here, in this setting, we have set a safe force limit of 50 newtons. So that's in the Z-axis, and that would be the load experienced through the end effector. Now, the question is, what is the actual load we're experiencing? So we've just run that test, and we've just recorded a force of 168 newtons. So it's a bit more than 50. When conducting your risk assessment and looking at the cobot, the two items that need to be considered are the force of the load, but also the pressure. So the force can be indicated by the force limits that are put into the cobot in the programming, but what is more difficult or potentially impossible to cover is the pressure experienced by the end effector, because the end effector is custom to the application. It is separate to the cobot itself, and therefore the pressures experienced, the only way you can monitor that, the only way you can verify or validate that is using a dedicated load cell with, in fact, pressure film is what we have here to capture the pressure being exerted by the end effector. Now that can't be captured within the robot programming. So within your risk assessment, how you validate that you've put an appropriate control measure in place has to be something like this load cell testing.